All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Debate Club. So, this is a platform that we have built with an aim to improve the quality of public discourse in India. And we have weekly debates and discussions on various different topics. For this week, the topic is religious personal law should be replaced by a uniform civil code. Agree or disagree? So, before opening the floor up for debate, I would like to give you guys some context on today's topic. That is, should a uniform civil code be replacing um, personal laws, right? Religious personal laws. So, India has one of the oldest constitutional debates ever since it was, brought into practice. So, Article 4 of our Constitution states that the state shall endeavor to secure a uniform civil code for all citizens. However, the framers deliberately placed it among the directive principles rather than making it an enforceable right. They recognize that India is an extraordinarily diverse nation where family laws have historically been governed by different religions and customary traditions. In today's India, matters like marriage, divorce, inheritance, adoption, and succession are regulated through different personal laws depending upon one's religion. Over the decades, these laws have been reformed at different speeds, leading to an ongoing debate about whether equality is best achieved through one common civil law or through gradual reform within each community. So, this discussion in the recent years seems to have gained momentum in India. Uttarakhand became the first state after independence to try and implement a UCC, and other states have begun introducing similar legislation. At the same time, there are legal experts, civil society organizations, and religious groups that continue to disagree on whether replacing personal laws is the right path moving forward for India. There are also supporters of UCC that argue that it would guarantee equal rights for every citizen, regardless of religion, eliminate legal inconsistencies, strengthen gender justice, simplify civil law, and also fulfill the constitutional vision that was once outlined in Article 44. Opponents counter that India's strength lies in its legal and cultural pluralism. They argue that personal laws form part of religious and cultural identity, that reform should come from within communities rather than through a single national code, and that true equality doesn't necessarily require legal uniformity. This also, to a certain extent, raises concerns about minority rights, federalism, privacy, and whether current models are genuinely uniform, right? So, this debate is not simply about one law, right? It asks a much broader constitutional question, in my opinion. Should India pursue equality through a single common civil framework, or can justice be better achieved while still preserving legal diversity? So, with that context in place, I now declare the floor open for debate. To speak, you will have to use the reaction button to raise your hands, and you will be queued up and given a chance to speak in that order. And for the initial hour of this session, this will be for context building. Please keep an eye on the timer while you speak. Each person is allotted 5 minutes. Thank you. Puneet, do you wanna speak?
No.
All right. So guys, like said, if you want to speak, you will have to use the reaction button to raise your hand. Yes, please, Venkat.
Um, Yeah, so my thinking on this is roughly as follows. In general, there's a question that should come before whether we should have a uniform civil code or not. And the question is, when should law get involved? Between individuals or between groups. The generally accepted principle, which I believe comes originally from English common law, is that the law should get involved under two conditions. One is there is an actual dispute between two individuals which they want to submit to the arbitration of the law, and the other is that there is no quasi legal body or any kind of authority to which those parties are willing to submit their dispute. And let me explain what I mean by that. Let's say that if two individuals have a dispute about property or inheritance or anything or any kind of issue, and if they're willing to submit their difference, if they're willing to submit their dispute to somebody they know, whose authority they're willing to accept. A village could be a village elder, it could be an elder within their family, it could be anyone really. Some person that both of them or the group agrees, whose authority the group agrees to accept. Uh, Under those conditions, if there is such a person to whom they are willing to submit their dispute, and that person gives a verdict that both of them accept, then there is no need for the law to get involved. There are two reasons for that. One is the general principle that formal law should be used as sparingly as possible, and the other is the limited resources of the law. I mean, no country has unlimited resources to keep adjudicating cases. Now, with this principle in mind, for example, the country from where we inherit most of our laws is England, for historical reasons, right? So I believe that in England, the Jews of England have their own special Jewish courts, where and it is up to, if there are Jews, who have a dispute, two or more Jews who have a dispute, they are allowed to submit their dispute to the Jewish court, and the Jewish court will give a verdict, which may not necessarily be legally binding on them, but if they accept the verdict, and the expectation is that they will accept the verdict, and then that is the end of the dispute. English law does not get involved at that point. And I think that's a good principle to have in general. I don't think the law needs to get involved unless one or more of the parties to the dispute wants the law to get involved. Now, let's say, to take a completely arbitrary example, if marriage in general is defined as a union between a man and a woman, but if two men and one woman want to be in a marital relationship, and the three of them are happy with that, and they're not really raising it as an issue to anyone, I don't think the law should get involved and tell them that that is illegal. I don't believe that is the case. It probably is illegal, but I can't think of any good legal reason why such a relationship should be disallowed. That's just kind of an arbitrary example. Now, having said that, what if the parties to the dispute do want to take their dispute outside of their traditional channels, right? Outside of their family, outside of their community channels, and they want to bring it to the law, to the formal law of the country, then I think there should be a uniform civil code that applies. Uh, Again, there are practical reasons for this, right? It is not possible to train every lawyer and every judge in the country in the different personal laws of the different communities. It's from a practical standpoint, it will not work. There are not enough resources for that. And so, all that they can do is to learn the one law of the land and apply it, use it to judge cases. So once it goes to the regular courts, once it goes to the secular courts of the land, there should be a uniform civil code that applies, regardless of faith, regardless of community, regardless of anything. At that point, they should be treated just as Indian citizens, and a common Indian law should apply to them. That is my position on where India should be headed in terms of a uniform civil code. Thanks.
Thank you, Venkat. That was actually a very great perspective put forth with great clarity of thought. So I too personally agree that on the point where you said कि मतलब law shouldn't get involved unless there is at least one party that needs the law to get involved, right? So I think that is where I strongly agree with you. So thank you so much. Does anybody else want to speak next? So I do have a little bit of more perspective to put forward here. When we talk about UCC, there is also another thing that comes up very, very often, the kind of cases that we have seen. Gender equality actually comes up a lot when we're talking about UCC. So I don't think the debate is really about whether gender equality in terms of law is important. I mean, I think almost everybody agrees that is. The real disagreement, I believe, is how that equality should be achieved, right? So there is one side of the spectrum that believes that if two Indian citizens are equal under the constitution, they should also be governed by the same civil laws, regardless of what their religional identity is. From this perspective, different legal standards for marriage, divorce, or inheritance create unequal treatment, especially when it comes to women. And a uniform civil code would ensure that the same rights and responsibilities apply to everyone throughout the country. But there is also another side of the spectrum that argues that equality does not necessarily require identical laws. India has always recognized diversity in terms of language, culture, religion, customs, and personal laws are viewed by many communities as an extension of that very cultural identity. When we look at this perspective, this school of thought, discriminatory provisions should certainly be reformed, of course, but reform should happen within each personal law rather than replacing all of them with a single uniform code. Now, if we look at some historical context, this particular motion of the debate has also evolved significantly because of several landmark judgments from the SC. In the Shah Bano case in 1985, the SC ruled that a divorced Muslim woman was entitled to maintenance under criminal procedure law and expressed regret that Article 44 had remained unimplemented. The judgment triggered a nationwide controversy, if we remember, and this is something that is still discussed whenever we talk about, whether or not a UCC should be implemented. This actually eventually led the parliament to pass a law limiting the effect of that ruling, although later judgments also interpreted the law more broadly to protect women's rights. Again, more recently, 2017, Supreme Court struck down instant triple talaq as unconstitutional, and Parliament later enacted legislation making the practice illegal. Now, these development are used on both sides. People who think it should be, UCC should be implemented, and people who think otherwise. These are quoted by both sides, right? So, supporters of the UCC argue that personal laws require constant judicial intervention because the system itself is very fragmented. Whereas opponents argue the exact opposite, that meaningful reform is already possible without abolishing personal laws altogether. Now, what makes this topic even more relevant is Uttarakhand 2024. In the state of Uttarakhand, the UCC was implemented, which again later came into force in January 2025. It is the first state in India since independence to implement a comprehensive UCC in the country. Since then, we have also seen states like Gujarat and Assam passing their own UCC legislations. However, these laws are not identical and each contains exemptions, particularly for STs. which raises an important question, if you ask me. If different states have different UCCs and some communities are exempt altogether, is it truly uniform? Now, because at in like once upon a time we were talking about should UCC be implemented, and now that we are seeing it slowly being rolled out, coming into being in different states, we see that different states in India have different uniform civil codes, right? Now, another layer of the debate concerns recommendations of the Law Commission. 2018, the 21st Law Commission concluded that a UCC was neither necessary nor desirable. At that stage, and instead, it recommended reforming discriminatory provisions within each personal law. However, now we come to the 22nd Law Commission, which reopened consultations in 2023, reflecting that the debate of whether a UCC should replace religious personal laws, it tells us that the debate still remains active and unresolved. So ultimately, I think as participants of this debate, we should evaluate and weigh two constitutional values that are both very, very important to India. On one hand, there is equality before law, and on the other, there is pluralism and religious freedom, right? One says every citizen is governed by the same civil framework. The other says diversity in personal laws is an expression of India's multicultural identity. So the challenge is in actually determining whether these values can coexist or whether one must give way to another. So that is something that I wanted to put forth as more context to show you guys what has been the historical context for UCC and what is the challenge going forward, and a little bit of personal perspective as well. So, anybody who wants to add to it, wants to give their opening statements and build more context, you are welcome to do so. I see Puneet. Yes, please.
Yes, I think there are many challenges before a uniform civil code is implemented. Let's first talk about the political challenges. Politically, there is a huge divide between political parties. They don't agree whether NUCC should be implemented or not. So, politically, it seems not possible. And second is community wise. And this is correlated with politics because religion and politics are correlated in India. Ovasi said that Uttarakhand's bill is Hindus is more copying Hinduism. So I think there is distrust in some sections of the minority that the UCC is like a tool for cultural dominance of the majority. So any UCC that is launched should be clarified. There should be dialogue with minority parties, with minority communities about clear intent that okay, we need UCC to promote equality before law and secularism. And second challenge is about there are some communities that have completely different cultures. So if we integrate them into a uniform civil code, it will be challenging. It will be like, prohibiting their cultural diversity, their expression of community values. So third challenge is it is administratively not possible. Like if we launch a sudden UCC in 2 to 3 years, there will be massive bureaucratic challenge educating the public, dealing with minorities' concerns, and then training the lawyers. As Venkat said, there are so many like no no yeah, this is the advantage of UCC that training lawyers will be easy. And then the economic challenges, like we already know, Hindu undivided family laws exist. So such frameworks will be dismantled because of UCC. There will be challenges regarding this. And then there is the question that Rose rightly said, that state overreach. Like Uttarakhand's UCC bill was criticized because it represented that every individuals who are in live-in relationship have to register themselves. This is state overreach and individuals' privacy and personal liberty. And but there are some positives of UCC as well. That if we implement UCC, as Venkat said, lawyers will not have to, be trained in 100 different personal laws. Many of the personal religious laws are not even codified. So first priority should be, regardless of UCC, that we should codify personal religious laws. So to reduce judicial ambiguity and deliver better decisions. And second thing positive would be that yes, it will, reduce the burden on judiciary. When a clear legal framework is provided, it will reduce the number of like different legal cases, different interpretations, delays, and all that. That's the second positive. But then the biggest challenge, and this is again a political challenge, is what will be the codes that will contain in the UCC? How will it govern marriage, divorce? What values are right, wrong? How will adoption, inheritance will be governed? Because every community, there are five, six major communities. Every communities have their own way. Which way is the right? Which way will the state choose to be implemented in UCC? And who will decide what will be there in UCC? These are some political challenges. Mm, yes, and yeah, last thing is codifying personal religious laws are required regardless of UCC is implemented or not. Yes, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Puneet. After listening to that, it makes me realize that more or less I am also of the same opinion as you. I think uh, UCC being implemented is not the bigger challenge. The bigger challenge comes when it is called a uniform civil code, but the same uniform civil code differs from state to state, right? I think we are two or three states in implementation wise, and it looks like the uniform civil code is different for each state. So it's not very uniform anyway. And people in India are very rooted in their religion and cultural identities. So communities um, being reluctant to go along with such a change is also another thing. Again, uh, training lawyers and administration staff and bringing the nation to agree on the implementation of the UCC nationwide when UCC again differs from state to state is a huge challenge. And apart from that, if we look at the other side, there are also challenges like personal laws not being codified and certain personal laws and being discriminatory to a set gender. For example, like we saw how we had to you know make triple talaq illegal, which was like very discriminatory to women. So things like these and the ambiguity that exists when it comes to personal laws, these are all things that create that create friction when it comes to implementation and um, judicial decisions, right? But at the same time, I think reforming personal laws is the way to go, at least for now, because anyway, there is no nationwide uniformity in the UCC that we have seen being implemented in these states. So I think it is better to leave. So, for example, it makes sense to, judge a criminal offense uniformly throughout the country, no matter what state the criminal is from, the alleged criminal is from, and make this criminal procedure uniform. However, a civil code, things like marriage, divorce, inheritance, adoption, or like we said, the state interfering in things like live in relationships, that more or less ends up looking and feeling like a breach of privacy rights. So, in these cases, I don't think a uniform code is required because these are deeply personal things. And every community has its, like, for example, to govern marriage, you have to understand what marriage looks like for different communities. Even if you take larger religions. It is not necessary that all people inside of that religion have the same customs to marriage, have the same procedures for divorce, right? So when it comes to things like that, it becomes very complicated. And the concerns with the Uttarakhand UCC, that it was reflecting majoritarian practices, again raises a concern regarding minority rights and their identity, that ends up looking like an attempt to, like, erase the customs and identities, traditions, the way of living of minority communities, even if it was initially uh, not intended to do so, right? It does end up looking some sort of way. So I think solidifying personal laws, codifying them, and making reforms where necessary, so that minority, majority, women, uh, people who are marginalized in India, they are not harmed. I think that is the way to go, in my personal opinion. But then anybody is free to counter that. Yes, please, Venk.
I wanted to elaborate and add a different point to the set of points that I already made. Basically, that when two or more individuals are willing to submit their dispute to a non-formal legal body, a non-formal body, and respect the decision coming from that body, there is no reason for formal law to get involved. That was the essence of my point. But as things stand, I don't believe that principle is generally accepted in India. For example, there are many. For example, it is illegal to give or receive dowry in India, I believe. Now, in many cases, the bride's parents are willing to give dowry. The groom's parents are happy to receive dowry. But the act of giving and receiving dowry remains illegal nevertheless. And the fact that there is no dispute between the giving and the receiving party is not considered relevant. And so these are the facts. I believe the reason for this position on the part of the law is that dowry is seen as a historical evil in India, and that the dowry transaction uh, is not believed to be purely consensual. It may be apparently consensual, but the general belief is that there is an element of coercion, albeit social coercion, in the act of giving dowry. And therefore, even though it may appear to be a consensual action, the law does step in and say that the giving and receiving of dowry is illegal. So, if you look at personal law through that lens, we may discover that a lot of practices that look consensual, that look like they have community sanction, that look like almost everyone involved in the transaction is agreeing to the transaction. Nevertheless, they may represent deep-rooted social evils that it would be desirable, from the standpoint of the long term, to eliminate, even by using the law as an intrusive weapon. I'm merely stating these things. I do not have a very strong opinion on this topic. To go back to what Puneet said, there does appear to be an element of malice, an element of the majority of an attempt to impose majoritarian values on others in the whole Uniform Civil Code debate. As long as that element of malice cannot be removed, it is hazardous to speculate on these things. And that's why I do not have a very clear opinion on it. But I think it is a very necessary debate to have. India needs to, I don't know if India needs a uniform civil code, but I think India does need a debate on the uniform civil code. So I'm happy that we are doing this today. Thanks.
Thank you, Venkat. When you brought up the dowry case, there was something else that popped up in my mind. I think child marriage is widely known to be illegal in India, but there are states where it still happens. And there was a certain case in which a woman witnessed that there was a child marriage proceeding in her village, and she goes and complains to the authorities. And now the problem here seems to be that the woman was of a quote unquote lower caste, and the child marriage proceeding was happening in a family was of a good social standing and was also a higher caste family. So what followed was like a series of horrors, a series of threats, her family feeling unsafe in their own homes. The woman was also sexually exploited later on, assaulted, I would say, by multiple men because she had gone as far as complaining to the authorities about a child marriage happening in her village, and her only two quote unquote crimes that she has committed here, based on how things followed, is that one, she was a woman who dared to speak up, and two, it was that she belonged to a lower caste family. So things like this are also something that add to the nuance of how deep such topics actually go. So yes, I definitely agree on what you're saying. कि मतलब when it comes to things like dowry, child marriage, or some oppressive practice that a community may or may not be following, it's not always that parties are very enthusiastically involved. Sometimes it is religious pressure, sometimes it is societal, and sometimes it is just that you may disagree, but the community doesn't. So you're just more or less pushed into it, right? So I think that is also a very important thing, a very important perspective to take into consideration while making decisions or forming opinions about such things. So thank you very much. Puneet and Atharva, do you have anything to add? So, before you guys put forth any more opinions, there is something that I personally wanted to talk about. We were previously, I believe Puneet was talking about the challenges that come with, having personal laws, or if we are to implement a UCC nationwide, what are the challenges that come with that set of decisions, right? So again, we are looking at like a polarizing political divide when it comes to the UCC, as mentioned by Puneet, because there are parties that view it as a constitutional obligation, and there are also parties that look at it as some sort of majoritarian agenda that wants to wipe out the identities and way of living of the minority communities residing, living in the country, right? And there are also many religious and cultural communities which view their personal laws as a part of identity and their heritage. So, in that case, reforms are accepted by communities. Like we have seen, so many personal laws in India have been reformed to make them fair and equal and non-discriminatory. Replacing entire personal law systems with a common code may face a lot of nationwide resistance due to concerns about again preserving religious autonomy and cultural traditions. So public acceptance and perception that UCC reflects the Hindu law. Again, like I was talking before, UCC models tend to borrow heavily from laws already applicable to Hindus, like the Hindu Marriage Act and the Hindu Succession Act. So this is actually something that critics tend to argue on a lot, right? Because this, according to them, makes the UCC appear like a new, like less like a neutral civil code and more like an extension of already existing majority legal traditions. So that has been something that has been raising concerns about minority rights and constitutional secularism. And there is also like lack of uniformity across states, which I have been highlighting a lot, because for me, more than implementing a uniform civil code nationwide, what actually doesn't make sense is that a civil code that is being called uniform is actually not uniform in terms of implementation if you look at it, because Uttarakhand, Gujarat, and Assam have introduced different versions of the UCC. And all these states are Indian states, right? So, how is it actually uniform if it differs from state to state? And personal law is something that falls under the concurrent list, which means that states do have the freedom to legislate UCC differently. So, this raises an important question. If each state has its own UCC, is the objective of national legal uniformity actually being achieved? I think not. Now, apart from that, some provisions, particularly mandatory registration of live-in relationships under the Uniform Civil Code of Uttarakhand, have sparked concerns nationwide over the right to privacy. People are often seen arguing online that requiring adults to disclose intimate personal relationships with the government, with penalties in place for non-compliance, may conflict with privacy principles recognized by the SC in the KS Puttaswamy versus Union of India judgment. Supporters, however, contend that such provisions improve legal protection and accountability. So, if we look at it in a more practical sense, whether or not UCC should be implemented is, I think, a question that is very further away that we need to answer. The main question is, do we even have an aim if we are going to implement UCC? Because one thing is clear, if laws like this, legislation of law like this, falls in the concurrent list, meaning that it gives state full authority to legislate as per its own will, that means that the UCC will not remain uniform throughout the nation, right? So that again betrays the whole point of it. And apart from that, are we even in a place where we as citizens or legislators even can form a proper opinion कि what is a better option? Reforming of personal laws to the point where everything is fair, despite having personal laws for civil cases, that every person in every community is being treated fairly in accordance with their own personal laws, personal religious laws. And are we even ready to have a nationwide uniform civil code? And if we do, how are we going to address the concerns that are already sparking like controversies and debates throughout the country, right? So I think that is a bigger question than should we have personal religious laws or should we have UCC in place? So, also, we will be wrapping up the debate early today. So, Venkat and Atharva, if you have anything to add as more context or even as a closing statement, I would really appreciate that.
Rose, thanks for the moderation and thanks for all the facts that you brought to bear on this. I think you useful perspectives. I do wish we had more people on the debate panel so that we could have got more perspectives. But that is what it is.
Truly, I would have loved to hear more perspectives and more nuance on this because, again, we usually have a lot of people coming in for different topics and giving us so much nuance and perspective. I wish it was also the case here, but yeah, like you said, it is what it is. Atharva, do you have anything to add before you go?
Yeah, just so like we have a constitution that is being amended several times. I think we can have a uniform set of like UCCs, but they can keep amending personal reforms with time. So because India is a diverse country and it is very hard to achieve um, um, consensus. So yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you everybody for being here. It was actually a very fruitful discussion, if you ask me, even if the numbers were comparatively less. So I hope to see you guys again the next week with a different topic. Until then, see you guys. Take care.